Thomas Brigg stood at the edge of his small clearing, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced among the trees. The tranquility of the woods surrounded him, a stark contrast to the life he once led. Once he had been a man feared and respected, his reputation as a gunslinger echoing across towns like a harbinger of death. The mere mention of his name could silence a saloon, and hardened men would avert their eyes, recalling stories of his quick draw and unerring aim. But that was before. Before the day everything changed, before he became a ghost of his former self, haunted by the memory of a boy who had not deserved the bullet meant for another. It was an accident, the kind that twisted fate into a cruel joke, leaving him with a burden heavier than any gun he had ever carried. That day, as he watched the life fade from innocent eyes, Thomas vowed never to draw again. He buried his revolver beneath the gnarled roots of an old oak behind his cabin, sealing away more than just a weapon. He buried the man he used to be. Years passed, and Thomas carved out a life steeped in quietude and love. He raised his daughter, Clara, in the serene sanctuary far removed from the chaos of gunfights and dusty trails. With each passing day, he nurtured her spirit, teaching her the ways of the land, the rustling leaves, the calls of distant animals, and the beauty of a world unmarred by violence. They shared laughter under the wide-open sky and warmth by the crackling fire, their bond growing stronger amidst the whispers of nature. Yet, despite his best efforts to shield her from darkness, Thomas could not escape his own past. Shadows lingered at the edges of their idyllic life, whispers of fate that would soon come crashing in. The peace they had built was delicate, like a fragile glass ornament waiting for an unseen hand to shatter it. That hand came in the form of a traveling preacher, a man cloaked in righteousness but carrying a malevolent intent beneath his holy facade. With honeyed words and false promises of salvation, he entranced those who sought hope. And when he appeared at Thomas's door with a smile as sharp as a knife, it was not long before he would plunge it deep into Thomas's heart. The day arrived when Thomas's world unraveled. Clara was taken from him under the guise of divine purpose, spirited away by the preacher and his men, leaving behind only echoes of her laughter in an empty cabin. Thomas felt the silence grip him like a vice, yet even in that suffocating quietude, something stirred within him, a long-buried resolve igniting like kindling to flame. He did not scream or shout. Instead, he walked with deliberate steps to the old oak tree that had witnessed both his vows and regrets. In the years that followed his vow, Thomas Brigg found solace in the routines of rural life, crafting a sanctuary for himself and Clara that thrived on simplicity and love. Each morning began with the gentle stirrings of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the cool breeze, as Thomas awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's windows. He would rise early, hands calloused from toil, as he prepared their modest breakfast of fresh bread and fruit gathered from the surrounding woods. The scent of warm food filled the air, mingling with the crispness of dawn, creating an atmosphere rich with comfort. Clara was a bright light in Thomas's world, her laughter like music that danced through their home. As she grew, her curiosity blossomed alongside the wildflowers that dotted their land. They spent their days exploring the forest, where Thomas taught her how to recognize edible plants and listen to the whispers of the wind. Together, they would venture to the nearby stream, where Clara would skip stones across its shimmering surface while Thomas watched with pride, his heart swelling at her unbridled joy. Their evenings were often spent by the fire, where stories flowed as freely as the flames crackled. Thomas shared tales of bravery and honor from his past life, but always refrained from revealing details that could taint Clara's innocence. Instead, he focused on fables that emphasized kindness and courage, lessons he hoped would shape her into a strong and compassionate woman. The bond they shared was forged in these quiet moments, strengthened by trust and understanding. Thomas marveled at how Clara's spirit reflected both his own tenacity and her late mother's gentle grace. They became each other's sanctuary against the world outside, a world that had once been filled with chaos but now felt like a distant memory. However, beneath this tranquility lay an undercurrent of unease. Thomas often found himself glancing over his shoulder as shadows flitted between trees, remnants of a past he had tried so hard to escape. Despite his efforts to shield Clara from danger, he could not silence the whispers of fate that lingered in the air, a constant reminder that peace is often fleeting. Seasons changed, and so did the landscape around them. The vibrant greens of summer faded into autumn hues, signaling time's relentless march forward. Yet amid this beauty, Thomas remained vigilant, aware that darkness could encroach upon their idyllic life without warning. They lived each day with a careful optimism, clinging to hope while knowing it could be snatched away in an instant. Little did Thomas know that this fragile peace was on borrowed time. Soon enough, a tempest would break upon them in the form of a preacher cloaked in false righteousness, a storm that would threaten everything he held dear. The day dawned with a pall of unease in the air, a foreboding that settled like a thick mist around Thomas and Clara's cabin. It was on such a morning that the traveling preacher arrived, his silhouette framed against the rising sun as he strode down the dirt path with an air of purpose. He was a man of striking appearance, his long coat flowing behind him like the robes of a prophet. Thick curls of hair framed a face that wore a charming smile, yet there was something unsettling in the depths of his eyes, an intensity that suggested ambition hidden beneath layers of faith. As he approached, Clara's curiosity sparked, her youthful innocence drawing her toward this newcomer. The preacher introduced himself with a voice like honey, smooth and enticing, promising comfort and salvation to those willing to listen. He wielded his words like a masterful storyteller, painting vivid images of a world reborn through faith, where struggles faded under the light of divine grace. It was an allure too irresistible for Clara's curious spirit, and even Thomas found himself momentarily captivated despite his instinctive wariness. "Your father tells tales of bravery," the preacher began, addressing Clara with an engaging warmth. "But I offer you something greater, the chance to be part of something divine. Come join us at our gathering, there is salvation in community." As he spoke, he gestured beyond their humble clearing to lands unknown, where promises seemed as vast as the horizon itself. But beneath that charismatic facade lay manipulative tactics as sharp as any dagger. The preacher preyed on fears and insecurities, weaving doubt into the fabric of their peaceful life. He spoke of sin lurking in every shadow, suggesting that isolation only fostered darkness. "You must allow others into your heart," he implored, his voice tinged with urgency, "for together we can conquer anything." Thomas stood at the edge of this carefully crafted seduction, feeling the tension coil within him like a taut string ready to snap. His instincts screamed warnings. This man was not here to save but to ensnare. The preacher's intentions felt cloaked in darkness, and Thomas could sense that behind every charming smile lay an agenda that did not include their well-being. He watched Clara's face light up with fascination as she leaned closer to the preacher, oblivious to her father's discomfort. As days passed and the preacher lingered in nearby towns, Thomas felt his unease deepen. Stories swirled around him, rumors whispered among townsfolk about healings claimed but never seen, miracles promised but never delivered. In hushed tones beneath flickering lanterns, others speculated about the preacher's true motives and how swiftly trust could turn into exploitation. With each passing visit from the preacher and his entourage, Thomas felt an ancient surge within him, a flicker of that old gunslinger spirit reawakening amidst his desire for protection. The preacher had unknowingly drawn a line in the sand, one between safety and danger, and Thomas could no longer stand idly by. The day unfolded like any other, with the sun climbing lazily in the sky and birds flitting about their morning routines. Thomas had gone out to tend to the garden, while Clara remained perched on a fallen log near the cabin, sketching pictures of flowers with vibrant chalk. The warmth of the sun painted everything in hues of gold, and for a moment everything felt right in their world. However, an unsettling tension roiled in Thomas's gut as he moved with an urgency he couldn't quite place. He glanced back frequently, stealing worried looks at Clara, who was too absorbed in her art to notice the cold shadow lingering over them. The preacher and his men had returned, more persistent than before, their charming facade chipping away at Thomas's composure. Then it happened. Suddenly, laughter erupted from the direction of the path leading into the woods, too much laughter for it to be innocent. Thomas turned just in time to see Clara rise abruptly from her log, excitement gleaming in her eyes as she caught sight of the preacher and his cohort approaching once more. "Look, Papa, they're back," she called out joyfully. Before Thomas could react or summon any sense of caution, the preacher stepped toward her with outstretched arms, his voice syrupy sweet as he declared, "Oh, Clara, we've come to take you to our gathering. You will feel the spirit seeping through you like warm sunlight." In an instant, two men flanked her, grabbing her arms firmly yet not violently. They moved swiftly, too swiftly for Thomas to comprehend what was happening until it began. "No, let her go," he shouted, adrenaline flooding his veins as dread surged through him like icy water. Clara's laughter faded abruptly into confusion as she sensed her father's panic. "Papa," she whimpered, searching for him with wide eyes filled with fear that pierced through Thomas like arrows. It was a sight he never wanted to see, a mirror reflecting his helplessness at this very moment. Thomas ran toward them, heart pounding in his chest, but the men were already pulling Clara away from him, guiding her into their ranks with deceptive ease. Every step they took felt like daggers thrust into his heart. "This is for your salvation, child," the preacher crooned again, his words a cruel mockery now, igniting flames of rage within Thomas. As they carried Clara farther away from him towards the tree line that marked their small world's edge, something primal stirred inside Thomas. Each stride felt impossible to contain. Anguish and fury coalesced into a single thought, that he must save her at all costs. But no matter how much he called out her name or fought against that tight grip of despair wrapping around him like a noose, it only deepened with each fleeting second. Finally rendered immobile by an unseen force of dread and desperation that gripped him tightly in its jaws, Thomas watched helplessly as they vanished among shadows of trees, a horrifying silence swallowing all sound around him. In that moment, when all hope seemed lost, the depth of his past lay heavy on his heart, whispering promises and vengeance long hidden beneath layers of regret. Time stood still, everything around him faded away until only one truth remained: he would do anything to bring Clara back home again. His life depended on it. As the dust settled from Clara's abduction, a tempest raged within Thomas Brigg. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, filled with memories that began to blend with the shadows of his past. Anguish clawed at his heart as he stood alone, the echoes of Clara's laughter suffocating under the weight of fear that she might never return. In that moment he was stripped bare of his peaceful facade. All that remained was a man torn between who he had become and who he had once been. Thomas had buried that side of himself deep beneath layers of guilt and regret. Those days when his gun spoke louder than words and fear followed in his wake. The weight of his vow to raise Clara far from chaos now seemed frivolous, overshadowed by a primal instinct, the instinct to protect his own against all odds. Yet the specter of past sins haunted him. He could almost feel the cold grip of fate, reminding him of the boy whose life ended too soon because of his hand. How could he pick up a weapon again after such horror? How could he risk becoming the monster he once swore to escape? As he paced back and forth under the old oak tree, memories swirled in a maelstrom of emotion. He could still see the boy's face, the innocence lost in an instant, and the guilt washed over him like a tidal wave. It was this guilt that had dictated every decision since that fateful day, serving as both chains and chainsaws cutting through any semblance of resolve. To reclaim Clara meant confronting not just the preacher but also confronting himself, the gunslinger who had given rise to every fearful whisper in towns long forgotten. Yet what choice did he have? The very idea of Clara in peril was enough to awaken something fierce and primal within him, something greater than fear or guilt, rage. It surged through him like wildfire, igniting forgotten skills and sharpening instincts long dulled by peace. Anger twisted with hope as he envisioned running after Clara, battling whatever darkness had ensnared her with ferocity he'd once harnessed. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. It felt like stepping onto a precipice where salvation or damnation awaited him. In this crucible of conflicting emotions, Thomas stood firm as uncertainty wrestled for dominance within him. He feared losing control, but understood that being passive would lead only to greater loss. The loss of Clara's laughter forever suppressed under layers of malevolence cloaked in false pretenses. With each heartbeat echoing like thunder in his chest, he approached one simple truth: salvation would require more than hope, it necessitated action. It demanded reclaiming the gun buried beneath years of remorse, the embodiment not just of violence but also protection and strength. He took a deep breath, grounding himself amidst inner tumult as determination crystallized within him. The time for hesitation had passed. Thomas Brigg needed to resurrect not just the gunslinger, but also a father willing to confront whatever darkness lay ahead for one reason: his daughter deserved to come home safe again. Determined yet apprehensive, Thomas Brigg stepped away from the cabin that had been both his refuge and his prison. The world around him seemed muted, as if the trees held their breath in anticipation of what was to come. Each footfall on the familiar path toward the old oak felt heavy with significance. He was not merely walking to a tree, but to a moment that would redefine him. Memories clung to the air like mist, echoes of laughter, whispers of lessons shared with Clara, and faint shadows of a man who once wielded a gun with deft precision. The oak stood sentinel in the clearing, its gnarled roots twisting into the earth like fingers grasping for something lost. Yet it was beneath those roots that Thomas had buried not just his revolver, but also the man he had been, the gunslinger who had once struck fear into the hearts of many. Now, that very man clawed at his consciousness, demanding recognition as Thomas approached. With each step the memories grew louder, gunfights in dusty streets, the adrenaline rush before drawing, and ultimately the haunting faces of those who bore witness to his lethal skill. As he knelt before the tree, his hands trembled with conflicting emotions. Digging into the soil felt like prying open a wound long festering, an act that could unleash a torrent of violence he had sworn to forsake. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, mingling with guilt and regret. Could he truly become that man again? What would it mean to return to a life fueled by anger and revenge? Yet another voice whispered in his mind, Clara's laughter, her trust in him, and her need for protection. With resolve surging through him like molten steel, Thomas began to dig. The dirt crumbled away easily under his hands, revealing fragments of his past, a life he thought he had left behind. He unearthed roots and stones until finally his fingers brushed against cold metal. The revolver emerged from its resting place, caked in earth but unmistakably familiar. Heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration, he pulled it free. In that moment of revelation, everything coalesced within him: anger at the preacher's deception, guilt over past mistakes, and an unwavering determination to protect Clara at all costs. He held the revolver in his hands as if cradling a newborn, both a weapon and a promise sworn to himself long ago to defend his family fiercely. As he inspected the cold steel under fading light, memories flooded back, training sessions under twilight skies where he honed his skills and learned to draw faster than any man alive. But this time it wasn't about killing, it was about reclaiming what was rightfully his daughter's safety and their future together. Steeling himself for what lay ahead, Thomas loaded the revolver with practiced precision. Each click echoed like a heartbeat as he filled chambers with silent promises of protection. This was not merely an act of violence, it was an expression of love, a father's desperate bid to safeguard what mattered most. With resolve etched into every line on his face and determination igniting within him like a wildfire ready to blaze anew, Thomas Brigg rose from the earth transformed, not just into a gunslinger again, but into a man resolute in purpose. He would bring Clara home. With the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows that danced among the trees, Thomas knelt before the old oak, the air heavy with anticipation. He felt the weight of history pressing down upon him as he dug into the earth, each handful of soil that slipped through his fingers symbolizing both a release and a return to something he had long buried. The act of unearthing his revolver was more than just a physical retrieval. It was a reclamation of power, a confrontation with the past he had tried to escape. As his hands worked through the dirt, memories flooded back, a whirlwind of gunfights, narrow escapes, and faces marked by fear or admiration. Each recollection felt like a ghost rising from its grave, haunting him with reminders of who he once was. But beneath those memories lay an undeniable truth. He had buried his revolver to protect Clara from the man he had been. Yet now, in her absence, that man seemed to call out to him as if demanding acknowledgement. Finally, his fingers brushed against cold metal. The familiar grip of his revolver felt both foreign and comforting as he pulled it free from its resting place. It emerged caked in earth but still gleaming with potential. This weapon represented not only violence but also survival and defense. As he held it in his hands, a rush of conflicting emotions surged within him, fear for what this meant for his future and exhilaration at reclaiming a part of himself that had lain dormant for too long. He sat back on his heels, staring at the gun as if it were an old friend and an adversary all at once. This revolver was a symbol of everything he had fought against since that tragic day, the life he had chosen over bloodshed, one guided by love and peace. and yet now it felt like salvation, his only hope for rescuing Clara from the clutches of those who sought to do her harm. With deliberate movements, Thomas began loading the chambers one by one. Each click echoed in his mind like solemn vows being sworn anew: protection, strength, courage. These were silent promises made not only to himself but also to Clara, a commitment that he would find her and bring her home safely no matter what it took. As he filled each chamber with bullets, determination settled around him like armor. This act was not merely preparing for violence. It was about reclaiming agency in a world that threatened to strip him of everything dear. He could feel rage igniting within him, a righteous fury that melded seamlessly with love for Clara. The setting sun cast an orange glow across the landscape as Thomas stood up, gripping the revolver tightly in one hand while wiping sweat from his brow with the other. The weight of what lay ahead loomed large before him. The preacher's men still roamed out there, yet for the first time since Clara's abduction, Thomas felt empowered rather than helpless. He was no longer just a father haunted by past mistakes. He was ready to confront whatever darkness awaited him with unwavering resolve. As dusk enveloped the land, Thomas Brigg prepared to step back into a world where shadows danced but light could still prevail. A world where love could drive out fear and reclaim what rightfully belonged to him, his daughter. With Clara's safety now resting on his shoulders, Thomas Brigg moved through the twilight shadows, each step a deliberate reminder of the journey he had embarked upon. The air was thick with anticipation as he made his way toward the preacher's camp, adrenaline coursing through him like a raging. He could feel the weight of the revolver strapped firmly to his side, a tangible connection to a past he had once sought to bury and now embraced as a source of strength. Preparation had not just been about gathering supplies, it had also required a mental shift. Gone was the peaceful father who nurtured a tranquil life with Clara. In his place stood a man forged by desperation and purpose, a hunter driven by love and vengeance. As he trekked through the darkening woods, memories of his former self flickered in his mind, faces of those he had once feared or respected, moments that shaped his identity as a gunslinger. This time, however, he was not looking for glory or reputation. He was fighting for something far more precious. Thomas recalled the stories shared around the fire, the fables of heroes who faced insurmountable odds and emerged stronger. He drew strength from those tales, envisioning himself as one of those figures, resolute and determined. He thought of Clara's laughter, her unwavering belief in him, and the trust she placed in her father's hands. All of it fueled him as he navigated the rugged terrain, urging him onward through pain and doubt. The preacher's camp came into view as he crested a hill. Flickering lanterns cast eerie shadows that danced along the ground, reflecting faces filled with blind faith or unyielding greed. Thomas felt a surge of anger rise within him, the very same anger that had simmered since Clara's abduction. It twisted like a knife in his gut, reminding him of everything that was at stake. These men were not just misguided believers, they were predators cloaked in sanctity, ready to exploit the vulnerable for their gain. As he approached the camp, Thomas took stock of his surroundings, noting the positioning of guards and the layout of tents. His heart pounded in rhythm with his determination. Every beat echoed with reminders of what he was about to do. He was no longer merely a father seeking his daughter. He was a man reclaiming his power and confronting the darkness head-on. The soft whispers of night enveloped him as he slipped into the shadows, moving closer to the flickering light that illuminated the preacher's makeshift throne. He could already hear the preacher's voice, a captivating mix of honeyed words and veiled threats, as he spoke to a small gathering about salvation and divine purpose. Thomas's grip tightened around the handle of his revolver. This night would not end without resolution. He would confront this man who had taken his daughter under false pretenses. With each calculated move toward the heart of the camp, he felt clarity sharpen within him, a clarity born from years of regret but now transformed into fierce resolve. As he drew nearer to where Clara was likely held captive, Thomas felt one last surge of purpose settle deep within him. This was not just about vengeance, it was about love, the love of a father willing to fight against all odds to reclaim what had been taken from him. His journey had begun with fear but would end with hope, hope for Clara's return and for his own redemption in the eyes of the world he had once abandoned. As Thomas Brigg moved closer to the preacher's camp, the atmosphere grew electric with tension, each heartbeat echoing in his ears like a war drum. The flickering lanterns cast unsettling shadows that danced along the ground, mimicking the turmoil within him. He could hear the preacher's voice weaving through the night, a strange blend of charisma laced with menace, as he regaled his followers with grand tales of salvation and righteousness. Each word dripped with deception, a reminder of just how far from grace this man had fallen. Thomas crept along the perimeter of the camp, each step measured and calculated. He scanned the area, noting the placement of guards and the makeshift barricades around the preacher's throne. His hands trembled slightly as they brushed against the cold metal of his revolver, a constant reminder of both his vow and his intent to reclaim Clara. This was no longer just an act of revenge, it was a fight for his daughter's life, a battle against a man who manipulated faith to exploit the weak. With every breath, Thomas felt the weight of this moment settle on his shoulders, pressing him down with both dread and resolve. So many years had passed since he had walked this path as a gunslinger. He had buried that identity alongside his weapon, hoping to create a peaceful life for Clara, free from fear and violence. But now, as he prepared to confront the preacher, that familiar longing for justice surged within him. Memories of choices made long ago flickered in his mind, each one ushering him closer to this inevitable confrontation. As he drew nearer to the preacher's firelight, Thomas could see Clara's silhouette bound near the center of the gathering, her expression a mix of confusion and fear that shattered his heart. Anguish rippled through him, turning it into an unwavering fury that radiated from deep within. The sight of her helplessness ignited something primal, a wildfire of protective instinct blazing away any hesitation left in him. He was her father and he would not fail her again. "Enough," Thomas bellowed, breaking through the veil of night as he stepped into view, revolver drawn and aimed squarely at the preacher. The camp fell into stunned silence, eyes widening in shock as all attention turned toward him. The preacher wore a sly grin, feigning amusement as he stepped down from his perch. "Ah, Thomas Brigg, back from the grave. I thought you'd hidden yourself away," he taunted, his voice smooth yet dripping with malice. "Let her go," Thomas commanded, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Why would I do that? She has found her way to the Lord," the preacher replied with feigned sincerity. "She is safe here." "Safe?" Thomas interrupted, disdain curling his lip. "You use her innocence as bait for your twisted schemes." The preacher's smile faltered for a moment, revealing a flicker of anger beneath his calm facade. It was enough for Thomas to see that this confrontation would not merely be a battle, it was a clash of wills laden with consequences beyond his comprehension. With resolve etched into every line of his face, Thomas's finger hovered over the trigger. He could feel everything hanging in the balance, his daughter's fate, his own redemption, and an old reckoning more profound than bloodshed alone. He was ready to bring justice to those who abused power and reclaim the peace he had fought so hard to protect. "Put her down," Thomas demanded again, each word resonating with authority laced with desperation. This was no longer about vengeance, this was about fighting against darkness itself to bring Clara back home. The confrontation shattered the night as gunfire rang out, followed by cries of shock and anger. In the chaos, Thomas's heart raced wildly, adrenaline surging through him as he fought to reach Clara. The preacher's men, caught off guard, scrambled to protect their leader, but Thomas moved with a fierce clarity, fueled by love and desperation. With each shot fired, he felt the weight of his choices press upon him. He had stepped back into a world of violence he had long abandoned, yet nothing mattered more than rescuing Clara from the clutches of that deceitful man. The struggle unfolded before him, moments of hesitation transformed into swift decisions forged in purpose. He shielded his daughter from harm while dismantling the very foundation of the preacher's twisted sanctuary. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of tension and conflict, Thomas found himself face to face with the preacher in a clearing bathed in moonlight. The preacher's facade had crumbled. Anger flickered in his eyes as he realized that his control over both Clara and his followers was slipping away. "You don't understand what you're doing," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I understand perfectly," Thomas replied coldly, revolver aimed steadily at the preacher's chest. "You preyed on my daughter's innocence, on trust, and now you will answer for it." Tension hung thick in the air as they stood locked in this moment of reckoning. Thomas could feel every heartbeat thundering in his ears as he wrestled with the consequences of violence once more. In that heartbeat stretched an eternity, a moment brimming with potential outcomes that could forever alter their lives. Yet just as quickly as it began, it was over. The preacher's bravado faltered under Thomas's unwavering gaze. the tension in the air snapping like a taut wire until it ultimately dissolved into silence. Though Thomas did not pull the trigger then, he felt justice served in a different manner. He had reclaimed not just Clara but also something profound within himself, a sense of agency that had long remained subdued. When they were finally reunited, Clara rushed into Thomas's arms, emotions spilling from her like a torrent, a mix of relief and lingering fear. "Papa," she cried, her voice trembling as she buried her face against his chest. In that embrace lay the resolution to all those years spent trying to escape violence, the realization that peace would not come from burying one's past, but rather facing it head-on and safeguarding those we love against injustice. As they made their way back through the camp now gathered around fallen figures and broken dreams, those who were followers turned victims, Thomas felt the cost of violence linger like a shadow overhead. Freedom had been purchased, but at a price higher than any coin could measure, innocence lost on both sides. Once safely away from the chaos behind them and back towards their cabin nestled among trees bathed in golden dawn light, questions lingered heavy on Thomas's mind. Could he ever return to that simple life built on peace? Or would this night mark an irreversible transformation into a man forever changed by actions born out of love? In Clara's eyes shining with trust and gratitude, he found some solace, a flicker of hope amid uncertainty. Perhaps redemption lay not within escaping one's past, but rather integrating it into a new path forward, one forged together where love triumphed over fear and family stood united through every storm that threatened to tear them apart. As they walked hand in hand toward home, their sanctuary, Thomas knew there would be scars left behind, but also new beginnings waiting to bloom. A future defined not merely by what was lost, but by what remained to be rebuilt anew under open skies filled with promise.